Hi everyone. Thanks for coming out and thanks for having me down here. I'm really excited to kind of connect with folks. What I wanted to really talk about was the air monitoring piece that we've all been talking about broadly. I wanted to echo a couple of the points that folks have been making this morning, right? There's clearly a lack of data here. SoCalGas is collecting this data and disseminating it. So it is a lot like the fox guarding the hen house here. Talking about agencies, not being able to come out and monitor. And I think even best intentions, we can all recognize there's gaps in these monitoring with the agencies. They can't be everywhere at once. And if it takes them 45 minutes to get out here, it's really hard to really figure out what we're breathing. And just that lack of information is making it really hard for folks to make informed decisions for their health as well as the health of their families. And then just going back to kind of these levels of chemicals that people have been talking about, there's no like healthy levels of chemicals, right? It's not like, oh, well, it's just a little benzene is good for you. So I think it's really important to note that even though these might be acceptable levels of chemicals, it's not necessarily safe. There's still so much we don't know. So I've been working with Save Porter Ranch for a while now to kind of develop this project and scope out goals and monitoring sites and different locations, things like that. And I recently was looking at the data that SoCalGas had put out. And one thing that was really shocking to me was that, it's being compared to OSHA standards. And OSHA is the Occupational Safety Health, right? So you're looking at standards that would be acceptable for your average middle-aged man for about 40 hours a week, right? And those are actually inappropriate standards to use with community-based health because you're talking about sensitive populations. You've got children, you've got elderly folks, you've got folks that might have compromised immune systems, different diseases. So it's really important to kind of go even lower on those standards. Also, these folks are normally in the community the whole time. We're not talking about a 40-hour work week. We're talking about, full 24 hours a day exposure. And I think it's really important to look at kind of those lower standards when talking about what's safe and what's acceptable. And I think the only way that we can figure that out is if we actually take the air monitoring into our own hands. And when we do the air monitoring, we can take samples when and where we want to, and then really look at kind of those health-based standards and what would be appropriate in order to make our own decisions for our health and the health of our families. So just a little background, I work at an organization, Global Community Monitor, and we do bucket brigades, and that's community-based air monitoring. I have my bucket. I'm going to show you guys in a little bit. I'll do a demonstration. But the idea is that it's empowering residents and recognizing the community as the experts in their community, right? They know where the odors are. They know where, these potential toxic hotspots are. So by giving folks the tools that they need to collect these air samples, we can actually get a better sense of air quality and identify, these monitoring or the agency gaps in monitoring, as well as the toxic hotspots. We can take samples on the fence line, but I think it's sometimes more appropriate to take it at the school, at people's homes, where people live, work, and play. So we do, the bucket brigades is where we kind of started with VOCs and sulfurs. VOCs would be like your benzene, toluene, your BTEX compounds, and then sulfurs would be the hydrogen sulfide, and different sulfur compounds. We can do 20 of those. And we do grab samples by collecting an air sample in a bag and then sending that off to the laboratory for analysis. And then once we get the data back, it goes to a third-party kind of biochemist expert, so he can review all of that and put it in a narrative so that we understand it. And then once we have that, it's really cool because we can go write press releases, pull together fact sheets, and use that data as an organizing tool. Sure, it's not really going to be like the silver bullet we have in air sample, but with kind of the community organizing piece, you can really back that up. And it'll back up those anecdotal stories of nosebleeds, sore throats, headaches with, well, and this is why, because we have these levels of chemicals in our air. A little bit of backstory too on that is we recently released, a year ago, we co-released a report with CEH, Sue Chang, who's just up here, around fracking. We did a 5-state monitoring project in Pennsylvania, Colorado, Ohio, Arkansas, and Wyoming. And we collected air samples near unconventional oil and gas, kind of in general, right? We can say fracking, acidization, compressor stations, pipelines, and we pulled together all of that data into this report with a peer-reviewed journal article, which really strengthened it. We released that and then went and did some work in Washington, D.C., meeting with elected officials, the EPA, and whatnot. And then the big victory was that it was cited in the decision in New York State to ban fracking. So the idea here is we feel there's a great opportunity to kind of build off of that in California and do collect samples at multiple sites in California and kind of pull together a report. So it was a really great match when I got in touch with Save Porter Ranch, and I think that this is a perfect time to kind of launch this project and move it forward. And we are hoping to do that as soon as we raise the funds to pay the lab for the sample analysis. I also have the bucket here in case we do smell some odors today. We could probably take a sample this afternoon and get some real data immediately. The lab takes about 10 business days to get the results back. Some other kind of victory stories I want to share. In Tonawanda, New York, this is probably my favorite. It's upstate New York by Buffalo and Love Canal. There's a Coke facility, petroleum coke processing plant. We started taking air samples near the community with the bucket collecting air samples. And we found really high levels of benzene in the air. We went to the EPA, we went to the Air District, they have the Department of Environmental Quality in New York. We just kind of kept sending them all the data during the organizing piece around it. We caught the attention of the EPA, who did their own monitoring. We also caught the attention of the Department of Justice, who actually filed a criminal case against the plant manager. And the plant manager is actually in jail right now, serving time for violating the Clean Air Act. So we've gotten a lot of traction around kind of mixing the scientific evidence with the community experience, and then challenging agencies to come and do side-by-side monitoring, challenging people to collect additional samples, putting in real-time air monitoring around the fence line of the facility so that you can log on a website and check the air quality. Relocating different places, that's been another victory for us. In West Oakland, there was a scrap metal recycler. It was a smelter. It was just melting lead. And we found lead dust in the high school, McClymonds High School, in the windowsills. So, we worked with the city, the recycler, and kind of came to an agreement. The recycler agreed to relocate out of the neighborhood and onto a much more industrial site, the old Oakland Army base, and then use that to redevelop it as a more green space. So we found that that was a really big victory, as well as in Detroit, there's folks living next to a really big oil refinery. The Marathon Oil Refinery that's now starting to accept tar sands and expanding and upgrading. And the community just decided that they wanted to leave. So together with some air sample data, they organized, they were able to negotiate an agreement where Marathon Oil Refinery actually paid them fair market value for their homes so that they could afford to leave. And I think, the idea behind this program is that it is really community driven. So I don't know what's best for folks in Porter Ranch, and I think that that's where we need the community input of what do we want to accomplish here and how do we want to do that. And then I can just show you how to use the air monitoring equipment, and then you guys can keep that and do the monitoring yourself. Another cool thing that I realized on the way here is that the lab we use is in Simi Valley, which is only about 13 miles away. So you can actually get the samples there immediately, as opposed to the overnight shipping and whatnot. If you have the time, you can just drive it over there and they can process it right away. You guys want to see the bucket?
Yeah.
So I just built it yesterday. And part of the work, the training that we would do is that I would come back down and we would do a full day-long classroom training on how to operate the equipment, where we'd actually build the buckets together so that folks know how to operate them. If a bolt comes loose or something comes loose, you'll be able to fix it. I think I'm going to climb up on the stage so everybody can see it. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Alright, so basically the bucket, it's a 5-gallon food storage bucket. Couple of valves on the top. Those are special from the kind of an industrial manufacturer, so they're stainless steel and brass to not contaminate the sample. And then here's the sample bag. It's a Tedlar bag. SoCal's been collecting samples in Tedlar bags as well. This is a demo, so we can practice with it and play around with it. But basically, you're just going to collect the air in here, and then this is what goes to the lab. So if you do have an odor incident, you collect the sample, send it to the lab, and then that night you have another one, you can just reuse the bucket, get a new bag. So you want to make sure that the bag is open, the valve's open. And then you'll fix it to this. I think it should be good. I used the wrench earlier, but that should just hold. And you put it in the bucket. So basically, we're just going to create negative pressure inside the bucket with this vacuum by sucking air out. Any pump will work. And then once we create enough negative pressure, we can open up the other valve so that air can rush in. Ambient air will rush in, and then we can send that off to the lab. So we have this hose. The majority of the stuff can be purchased at any hardware store. And I just kind of put it in. I had to get a new vacuum. They discontinued our trusty ones that we've been using for years, but this seems to be working fine. And you just suck the air out, generally for about, a minute to 2 minutes to prime it. And then you just unscrew this valve, the plug. And you can actually see, Alex, can you see the bag moving? As the air is going into the bag to equalize pressure, right? It's called a grab sample, and it's really good for kind of these moments of acute exposure. When you're feeling pollution, when you can sometimes taste it, you can smell it. You're getting a bloody nose. You can just grab that in the bag. You don't need to fill the bag up completely. You just want to get like a good amount of air in there. And you just seal this off. Turn the vacuum off. This is going to be a little sample. In the interest of time. And then you want to close the valve off first. And there's your air sample. Let me know if you guys have questions on the bucket or if you want to play with it maybe afterwards. Feel free to come out and we can check it out together.
All right, thank you. So thank you to our two speakers. I mean, I feel like we're developing a plan for what we can do and how we can take action and not just be victims to what's going on in our community. So next, I'd like to introduce Alexandra Nagy. We call her Alex. She is a Southern California organizer at Los Angeles branch of Food and Water Watch. She works within Los Angeles and Greater Southern California region to advocate for consumer health issues, namely food safety, the human right to water, and a statewide ban on fracking. Her 2015 work will focus on working with diverse communities across the region to advocate for real drought solutions and organize for ban on fracking and urban oil drilling. Alex holds 2 degrees in political science and urban studies from University of California, Irvine. While at UC Irvine, Alex created a sustainability program for campus dining services and developed campus's first student-led community gardens called Ants in Your Plants. So here's Alex.